I would like to suggest today that the true identity of those who profess to be followers of Jesus can be unmasked by fire. And that's the title of our exploration of 3 John today, Unmasked by Fire. Now, some Christians seem convinced that divisiveness, infighting, controversy, or disagreement in and of themselves are signs that a community has fallen out of favor with God. It can almost seem for some that the very presence of discord reveals the corrupted core of a community. Contrarily, what I think 3 John reveals is not that divisiveness will not, or even should not, occur in Christian community. Instead, I think the value of 3 John is that it reveals how true followers of Jesus are to respond to disagreement in their midst. In the light of the metaphor that I've suggested, we're not unmasked simply by the presence of discord or disagreement in our community. Rather, discord can be the fire through which our unmasking occurs. If you have access to a Bible, I invite you to turn with me to the New Testament epistle of 3 John. 3 John is a particularly short epistle. It consists of only 14 total verses. Despite its length, however, I have found this letter to be both instructive and challenging. Please follow along with me as I begin reading in verse 1. The elder, to my dear friend Gaius, whom I love in the truth. Dear friend, I pray that you may enjoy good health, and that all may go well with you, even as your soul is getting along well. It gave me great joy when some believers came and testified about your faithfulness to the truth, telling how you continue to walk in it. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children are walking in the truth. Dear friend, you are faithful in what you are doing for the brothers and sisters, even though they are strangers to you. They have told the church about your love. Please send them on their way in a manner that honors God. It was for the sake of the name that they went out, receiving no help from the pagans. We ought therefore to show hospitality to such people, so that we may work together for the truth. I've entitled our first point, The Controversy. 3 John is a bit reticent when it comes to revealing the full scope of the situation which it has addressed. But most probably, some traveling preachers or teachers came to one of these churches, which were most likely in the region of Ephesus, hoping for hospitality and perhaps financial support. The elder, who traditionally has been associated with the Apostle John, so I'll call him John from here on out, appears to have supported these men as authentic teachers of the gospel who merited Christian charity. A local man of some influence, it's not clear whether his authority was official or whether he simply assumed it. His name was Diotrephes, apparently disagreed as to how these travelers should be received. What interests me at this point in our discussion is the observation that John did not initially object to the differing of opinions. There is no sense in the text that Diotrephes had no right or responsibility to disagree with John. One might have expected a person with a title of authority, like elder, to accuse Diotrephes primarily of disloyalty, or a lack of fealty, or something like that. But John expressed no such concerns. It's not the disagreement that prompted this letter, but rather Diotrephes' response to it. Some years ago, a pastoral colleague of mine recommended that I read the book The Bait of Satan by John Bevere. The words I'm about to read from that book are meant to provide commentary on 2 Timothy chapter 2, verses 24 through 26. Bevere writes this: Those who are in quarrels or opposition fall into a trap and are held prisoner to do the devil's will. Even more alarming, they are unaware of their captivity. Like the prodigal, they must come to themselves by awaking to their true condition. They do not realize that they are spewing out bitter waters rather than pure. When a person is deceived, he believes he is right even though he is not. That's the end of the quotation. Now, certainly I can agree with Bevere that some kinds of quarreling or opposing can be sinful and destructive, particularly when the motivation behind the discord is compromising. But my difficulty with the book when I first read it, and it continues to be my difficulty with it, is that it tends to presume that any disagreement with church leadership should be viewed as suspect. This is the bait of Satan for Bevere, the rationalizing of disagreements and disloyalty with theological or spiritual fervor for God. However, I would argue that this sort of expectation of blind submission to leadership is not present here in 3 John. In fact, I believe 3 John suggests that because people equally committed to the love of God and love of each other can disagree as to appropriate behavior in a given circumstance, we must not presume that disagreement or discord indicates rebellion against Jesus. Discord itself can be a sign of the health of a community. The problem for John in this instance does not appear to have been the disagreement, but rather the response of Diotrephes. Our first point was the controversy. The second now is the response. Continue following along with me as I pick up reading in 3 John, now in verse 9. I wrote to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to be first, will not welcome us. So when I come, I will call attention to what he is doing, spreading malicious nonsense about us. Not satisfied with that, he even refuses to welcome other believers. He also stops those who want to do so and puts them out of the church. The disagreement between John and Diotrephes was more than words, apparently. Diotrephes seems to have ignored John's correspondence and even put people out of the church who attempted to extend hospitality and support to these traveling speakers. Perhaps surprisingly, these types of disagreements are not absent from the New Testament. Paul and Barnabas, for instance, seem to have gone their separate ways over the issue of John Mark in the book of Acts. Peter and Paul had their public disagreements as well. Such examples demonstrate that the sin here was not in the disagreement itself. The sin for which John impugned Diotrephes was not for disagreeing with him, but for refusing to correspond, refusing to bring the issue to the community, refusing to allow any in the group to act contrary to his opinion. John, in short, accused Diotrephes of loving to be first. Some have suggested that Diotrephes may have been convinced that his convictions were coming from the Holy Spirit of God himself, and certainly these types of confrontations are exacerbated by those who believe that their opinion is not their own, but God's. However, 3 John doesn't really give us much information as to Diotrephes' motivations. What is clear is that Diotrephes felt no compulsion to correspond with John, to hear John out, or to allow any in the congregation he was a part of to see things differently than he did. This type of response to disagreement has proven all too common in Christian community, and it may be the reason that some Christians see all discord as inherently evil. And I have little doubt that Diotrephes found himself in a difficult moral situation. Clearly he disagreed with John as to the correct way forward, and he seems to have been hesitant to allow John to present his case, perhaps in the fear that others might side with John. The peril, though, was less his differing opinion, and more his absolute confidence in the validity of his position. We should recall frequently that because both church history and the New Testament make it clear that people equally committed to God and to each other can disagree fundamentally on a given issue, we must never associate our personal or group opinion with that of God. Our first point was the controversy, and our second, the response. Our third now I'm calling the unmasking. Continue following along with me as I pick up reading in verse 11. Dear friend, do not imitate what is evil, but what is good. Anyone who does what is good is from God. Anyone who does what is evil has not seen God. Demetrius is well spoken of by everyone, and even by the truth itself. We also speak well of him, and you know that our testimony is true. It would be nice if we knew Diotrephes' side of the story, of course, but 3 John really doesn't give us much information, as I've said. Based on 2 John, it seems apparent that John himself was not opposed to denying hospitality to traveling preachers and teachers who were not remaining faithful to the apostolic testimony and teaching. At the very least, we should presume that John was not advocating hospitality irrespective of what a given preacher or teacher was professing. However, the language of 3 John indicates that John did not consider these traveling speakers to be of that heretical sort. It's not clear why Diotrephes disagreed, but what is clear is his resultant behavior. Instead of submitting to John's opinion, or continuing in conversation, or even agreeing to disagree and letting the others in his community make up their own minds, Diotrephes decided to make his opinion the law of the land. This, I believe, is the evil that John was confronting. Diotrephes not only refused to extend hospitality himself, but he tried to prevent others from doing so by putting them out of the church. This behavior proves quite a contrast to John's response, both to false teaching in 2 John and to Diotrephes himself here in 3 John. Nowhere in 2 John did John advocate disfellowshipping people who extended hospitality to the false teachers in that context. And nowhere here does John insist on the excommunication of Diotrephes himself. The openness to dialogue and to bring divisive issues to the community on the part of John seems to have been rejected entirely by Diotrephes. According to verse 11, this response to discord unmasked Diotrephes, not only as a person engaged in evil behavior, but as one who had not truly seen God. John found himself running up against an immovable object in Diotrephes, a man so entrenched in his position and so assured of the justice of his claim that he had shut off all lines of communication and begun to act unilaterally. Consequently, the elder encouraged Gaius no longer to look to Diotrephes as a model of Christ-likeness, but rather to consider another man, who we know little to nothing about, a man named Demetrius. However pious Diotrephes may have appeared, however charismatic a leader or layperson he may have been, however firm his convictions, however reasonable his logic, discord in the community unmasked him for who he was. What I believe is at stake for us in this short epistle of 3 John is this. Because the godly seek not only to listen, but to understand another person, no person who has truly known Jesus will satisfy themselves with knowing only their own opinion well. Love and Christ-likeness is about openness to discussion and to communal discernment, particularly in matters of faith and practice. The controversy in 3 John was over the proper treatment of a number of traveling preachers and teachers in the region of Ephesus. The response of one prominent church leader, whether lay or official, was to ignore the contrary opinion of John and to make his opinion law by pushing out all naysayers. John has indicated to Gaius that such behavior was an indication of godlessness. What is revealed when we are challenged, when we are disagreed with, when we are disbelieved? The natural human tendency is to vilify our opponents or to find some reason, apart from the merits, to discount her or his contentions. The same happened to Jesus, if you recall. When his listeners disagreed with him in the Gospel of John, they responded with, "Aren't we right in saying that you are a Samaritan and demon-possessed?" The extent of Jesus' influence over us and our lives is most evident in these moments. I would suggest that we must give those who claim loyalty to Jesus Christ the benefit of the doubt and work hard to understand their point of view nearly as well as we understand our own. John has already indicated in 2 John that those who dismiss the authority of the apostles of Jesus to interpret their experiences with Jesus for the Christian community for all time should be ignored and left unsupported. Even so, it would appear that the default Christian response to disagreement should be a willingness to listen, to dialogue, and to open the discussion to the broader community. This presumption, in fact, may have been part of the reason why John had to write so forcefully for the withholding of hospitality in 2 John. I pray that you and I will find ourselves open to critique, willing to engage in debate, and courageous enough to trust the final outcome to the larger Christian community in nearly every area of disagreement. What has the fire of discord unmasked in you and in me? May the next fire reveal more of Christ and less of our natural selves.